We're going to get started here, Thane. Some
All
introduction.
right. Well, I found Fiona. She's
Awesome.
with her mom. I don't know if you can see her there.
Oh, that's awesome. So to our attendees, Thane Maynard is showing us Fiona.
She's there with her mom, BB, and she's the only animal in the 145 years of the Cincinnati Zoo who paid her own way.
Wow, out of the crowds. She's definitely a popular one.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. For those that were able to jump on, Thane was starting us off with Fiona. So we're really excited to have Thane Maynard here today to talk about the zoo's COVID-19 response, new renovations and additions, the PNC Festival of Lights plans, including how businesses and community members can support the zoo. So I'd like to take just a moment to introduce Thane for those of you that may have not met him before. Cincinnati Zoo Director Thane Maynard is internationally known for his dedication to wildlife preservation, research, and education. He was authored more than a dozen books. The most recent, Hope for Animals in Their World, was co-authored with Jane Goodall. He has also shared science and environmental news via his nationally syndicated radio program, The 90-Second Naturalist, for 30 years. His travels to promote biological diversity, natural history, and wildlife conservation have spanned 5 continents and earned him a membership in the Explorers Club. He is an active member of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums and a member of the Board of Trustees for the Margot Marsh Biodiversity Foundation, a primate conservation fund headquartered in Washington, D.C. So Thane, thanks so much for being here and spending time with the Uptown community this afternoon. And I know that you're kicking it off with Fiona, so we're excited to have you, and we've had a lot of attendees submit great questions and just a lot of enthusiasm around this event today.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me. I did decide to do it out here on the grounds, partly because it helps illustrate some of the things I'll be talking about, but mostly because we've all done about 5,000 Zoom calls by now, and the thought of looking at me, an old white guy sitting in my office, is not nearly as compelling as getting out on the grounds. Fiona is hiding in the pool around the corner with her mom, so keep your eyes out behind me. If you start to see a big hippo coming, that'll be BB the mom.
Oh, that's
But it's a symbol of how the zoo succeeds. You know, we're fortunate during the COVID to be an outdoor park, and so though our attendance is about half of what it was in previous years, we've cut some costs and we're able to run in the black and pay our bills. And it is heartening how much the zoo means to local families. It really does. You know, I often joke that Pittsburgh is a football town and Cincinnati is a zoo town. And especially during this pandemic, parents, moms, kids are just ecstatic at the idea of being able to get out of the house and have somewhere to go. So that's been a fun success for us in a difficult time, because for our business, just like almost everybody's business, it's not what it once was. I think everybody in Uptown certainly knows, and others watching too, over the years, the zoo has grown in its attendance and its reach in the community. And frankly, with things like Facebook Live shows all around the world, we've reached hundreds and hundreds of millions of people over the last 3 years to do with Fiona and her growing up. And during the pandemic, we've reached actually many more when folks were stuck at home. But right here in Cincinnati, you know, the zoo has grown to be the biggest draw in the city of Cincinnati, now outdrawing the Reds, and the biggest draw in Hamilton County. And that's no small thing right here in Uptown on the corner of Vine and Erkenbrecher on the 67-acre park where it's always been ever since Andrew Erkenbrecher founded the zoo. It shows people really want to get here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love that you're on the grounds, because you're right. We've all been on these virtual calls and listening in and tuning in. So it's nice to have a different background comparatively to the office. So, you were speaking to the COVID-19 pandemic and how you have adapted. What are some of the ways that the zoo has adapted? I know one attendee asked if you are fully functional at this point.
Well, we've had to make lots of changes. And one of those, of course, is now we're requiring masks. I'm not going to have a mask on during this call, but I'll try not to be too near people. Certainly masks are required if you're going into indoor buildings or you're doing certain things that are crowded, like seeing Fiona, waiting for the train, um, feeding the giraffes, things like that. We made lots of changes on how close visitors get to some species. There are known species that are affected by the COVID virus, and those include predators, including cats and dogs and other what are called mustelids, small to medium-sized predators. You probably famously heard of the minks in Denmark that had to be killed, unfortunately. So we make sure there's at least a 6-foot distance from visitors from animals that we think could catch the disease. An example of that is I'm down by our meerkats, which are cute little animals. They're a type of a mongoose from South America. But instead of going right up to the glass and reaching over, we have a barrier that keeps you at least 6 feet away. You know, beyond that, we've tried to make sure anyone who can work from home does. And we very much have put an effort into limiting crowd size. Our maximum in the summer was 6,000 per day, but we were only letting people sort of pulse in at about 1,000 per hour. So we have the ability to count how many people are still in the park. And we usually maxed out at about 2,500 people in the park at one time. So that's not nearly as crowded as it would have been a year ago. We're going to run the Festival of Lights this year, starting on November 21st. And for folks that come, you'll have a good visit because it'll only be about 1/3 as crowded as it has been in the past. That's our most popular zoo event. And we used to have it where we'd have crowds as big as 15 or 20,000 in one night. And now we'll have a maximum of 5,000 for the festival.
Is there a limit on the number of tickets that'll be sold for each night for the Festival of Lights?
There is, just like began in June and ever since. You have to go to the zoo's website, get tickets ahead of time. It's a timed reservation. The timing is just to get in, not about what time you can stay until, but most people stay at the zoo about 2 hours. That program has worked pretty well. People caught on to it. You will need to be patient in the Festival of Lights because what'll happen is when people see the weather forecast and they see, well, gosh, on November 30th, it's going to be cold and rainy, they might not try to get a reservation. But if they see on December 3rd, it's going to be beautiful, then everybody would want to come. But we won't be able to let as many people in as we did in the past. But we'll work hard to make sure that it runs for 6 weeks. We're also going to stay open for evening and lights in January on the weekends to try to give folks that escape and a chance to get outdoors.
Absolutely. I feel like we're all just looking for something to do right now that's outside, even when the cold months hit. And, you know, right now it's been really warm these past few days. I'm going to guess you've been busy these past few days.
You know, it has been fascinating. Normally what happens to the zoo in about mid-August is falls back to school. But this year, school's sort of on and sort of not on. Some kids are doing it by Zoom. Some kids are doing it now as homeschool. So as you can see when I walk around the grounds, here at 2 in the afternoon on a fairly chilly day, we've got a big crowd in the zoo. Our crowd today won't be huge, but probably 2,000 people in total during the day.
Well, that's great, especially as people are adapting and they have the opportunity to get outside and instead of doing all of their coursework from home, you know, they have an opportunity for education when they come to the zoo. One of the questions—
well, the outdoor experience is certainly the reason that it's working.
Yes. And
before we jump to the next question, I'm going to show you 2 of our great animals. This is John and Imani. They are our African lions. John's there in the foreground. They are much bigger than they look on this camera. He's over 400 pounds and she's over 350 pounds. And they are really a great pair of lions.
Yes.
They're a good example of the challenges in modern zoos in that lions breed real well in captivity, but there's not always a need for more lions. So you have to manage that very carefully. Imani's on birth control, as are right now all of our female gorillas. So we don't want to breed them and have new babies until we know there's a place for the babies to go.
Absolutely. Have the animals acted any differently than before when you had more guests coming to the zoo?
You know, when the zoo was really empty, those 3 months, mid-March to June 15th, it did affect some animals. Primates are very attentive to hierarchy and other animal behavior. And of course, we're big primates. And so gorillas, bonobos, our relatives, they did in fact really look as if, where are all those other apes? Why aren't we seeing them do all the shenanigans they do? An example of what was different is when we first started to open back up, the folks from the Cincinnati Chamber Orchestra called us and said, we can't do any concerts these days, so we'd love to come play at the zoo. And they came an hour before we opened and they played for animals. They played for the elephants, they played for the giraffes, they played for the gibbons, which are lesser apes. And it was just phenomenal because to varying degrees, the animals really paid a lot of attention. And I think it was the novelty of it that, they'd never had, a cello and a violin and a viola and everything playing right there in front of them. And then, of course, they played another hour when we opened, and as folks were trickling into the zoo, they got treated to the same thing. So that was a fun time as well.
Yeah, sounds neat. That would be neat to see a recording of that, to see how they react, and I'm sure it's on your YouTube channel. How has education and engagement shifted, like we were talking about with schools and the events that you've normally have where the zoo would participate in? Have you shifted to virtual offerings or grab and go options?
Well, we have indeed. In fact, a big part of what we've had to do, and I'm sure everybody that's involved with the business anywhere has, is we've had to sort of pivot and say, okay, how can we innovate and run some great programs that are really different than what they were in the past? I think everybody in various degrees of their life experienced what we did here at the zoo, which is we realized how spoiled we used to be, because we would hold a program for schools and thousands of people would come. And we'd hold a training for teachers and the same thing, or we'd hold a fundraiser and thousands of people would come and just jam into the zoo. And this is a year where that's not working. So in terms of education programs, it's really been interesting. We have had a fair number of loosely organized field trips. So not the same as when a school came for a specific program and got a bus and brought, 200 or 300 kids, but individual teachers, individual groups able to bring smaller groups over, and then we can hold a program for them. You may know we have a full-time high school here at the zoo called the Zoo Academy. They are still in class, and half the day they work out on the grounds. They work with the zookeepers and the animal health staff and the folks in our botanical garden. But as you might have read in the paper, that ends on November 23rd, all the way through the holidays. All of CPS is gonna go remote after that. It works much better for the Zoo Academy if the kids are here, because it's a hands-on experiential program. In the spring, when they went virtual, that had a lot of challenges attached to it. These are teenagers, 16 and 17 years old. You might remember being a teenager, so you might not be very focused on school. They're from CPS, they're from Hughes Center. Not every kid in the group has a snazzy, connection to the internet or a snazzy laptop. So trying to really make peace and piecemeal so that everybody had a chance to do their work was important. And I think they'll be better at it this fall than they were last spring when it was sprung out of nowhere. But most of our programs are continuing, but on a small level. We have a program called Zoo Troop, which is really neat. It's an ongoing program, starts with young kids, and over the years, they might even get to be middle schoolers or older that stay in our education programs. We are doing that, but with smaller groups, only 9 kids per group, per teacher, and almost all outdoor activity rather than indoor. Programs going on, and is really good. We also have a college graduate program that we do with Miami University, and that is ongoing as well. But again, it's a small group activity and an experiential activity too.
For sure. Well, you've definitely had to adapt during these times to really still engage all of the people that you involve with the zoo, but it's incredible to see what you've done. And I know the Rue Valley just opened up with the kangaroos. Yeah. Could you share a little bit more about some of the upcoming renovations or additions to the zoo exhibits?
Sure. Well, we are about 2/3 of the way through our big fundraiser. It is called More Home to Roam. And the idea behind it is exactly that we're on the same 67 acres where the zoo was founded. But if anybody's been in Cincinnati a long, long time, you know that up until about 20 years ago, over a quarter of the zoo was paved for parking lots. And we've been pushing those cars out and making more room for animals. Because when the zoo was founded, there weren't any cars. It was 1873. So by pushing the cars out, it's able to do this. I'm here in our Africa exhibit, and this is 8 acres that has everything from half a dozen giraffes to 11 African wild dogs to Fiona the hippo. all where minivans used to park just 10 years ago. Our next big push on that eventually will be to push the cars out of our last big parking lot down in the back. We call it the safari lot. And we're going to move our elephants down there and go from 4 elephants to 8 elephants in a breeding program. But this program, More Home to Roam, we've raised $94 million toward 150 in honor of our 150th anniversary that's coming up. And the first step was to create an easier to get walk-in entrance on Birkenbecker, and that's done. And then we just completed Rue Valley this summer, which is great. It's an Australian walkabout, and that's done. And we also built an African penguin exhibit where our sea lions used to be. So those are done. The other big areas to come in the next 3 or 4 years are the big elephant facility I mentioned. It's a huge effort. It's $55 million. And I know you think, how do you need to build a barn and a yard for elephants for $55 million? But of course, if you replaced Paul Brown Stadium today, it'd be $1 billion. And the zoo's doing a lot better than the Bengals. Anyway, the other things we're going to do over the next few years to make improvements are redo our rhino facilities. Our zoo's known for black rhinos, Sumatran rhinos, Indian rhinos, and we're going to create a really great rhino reserve, give our rhinos twice as much space. And then beyond that, we're going to improve down the road what we do with polar bears. And that'll be about it over the next 4 years.
Well, I'm looking forward to see what you do with the polar bears. That is my favorite, especially when they are swimming backstroke. So
exactly.
One attendee, you know, the zoo and botanical garden, one attendee has mentioned that they want to start their own pollinator garden at their home. Can you share a little bit more about the Plant for Pollinators program?
Absolutely. You know, the Cincinnati Zoo has been involved with conservation a long time. We're leaders with working with the gorillas in the Congo and with African predators. With Sumatran rhino, we're the first zoo that ever figured out how to breed those, and we're still involved in Indonesia. But when we think of how can we get local people involved with nature, probably the very best way is to get them outdoors, observing nature, and also playing a role in their garden. And this idea of plants for pollinators right in your own front yard or backyard is just the greatest thing. Because what people will find if they is a myth that, oh my God, I don't have a green thumb. Well, you don't need a green thumb for native plants. Native plants are supposed to live here. So if you plant, whether that's honeysuckle, Joe Pye weed, all kinds of things like that, you put that in, water it for 1 day, and it'll be good forever. Comes back every year. And to have these swamp sunflowers that look like tall black-eyed Susans, or to have purple cone flowers, or some of the others I mentioned, I'm telling you, after a season of those, you'll have goldfinches, you'll have monarch butterflies if you have the milkweed. And I don't mean maybe, I mean you can plant a native and eventually chrysalis, and they'll open up and fly away. So the zoo's part of a big national program to try to get people to do more native planting because it's good for the pollinators, and it's also a phenomenal program for public education of showing people how nature works, how the seasons pass, and getting them to be outdoors and care.
I've seen the signs all over the city. It's been a neat branding effort too, to just educate. You can be educated in your own neighborhood depending on who has a garden or a neighborhood garden. So it's really been neat to see. You know, when
you first start
yeah,
on the native gardens, when you first start, some of your neighbors might be like, what are you planting? Because, you know, it's not the same as box hedges or planting chrysanthemums.
you may have cut out there, Thane. We'll just give it a few seconds. It's been buffering a bit.
I can see you.
I can see you now. It just buffered out a little bit.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So we had another attendee that has asked about the latest advancement in research, and you mentioned a few things as you stopped by some of the animals, but I know there's a crew program, and would love to just hear a little bit more about the research you all are doing.
Absolutely. Our crew program goes back 40 years. It stands for the Center for Conservation and Research of Endangered Wildlife. And it is a remarkable program. 7 full-time PhDs work in that program. Most of them are working on reproductive biology. Dr. Terry Roth, who runs the program, is the world expert on the Sumatran rhino. Dr. Bill Swanson, who works there, is the world expert on small wild cats. We've got an expert on polar bears. We've got a renowned expert on native plants and what it takes to freeze their seeds and protect them. And our crew program, as it's called, is involved all over the world. Talking about research, polar bears, I think everybody knows, are under terrible siege right now as the Arctic ice is melting. So in a zoo setting, we're able to do research hard to do on wild polar bears. You can measure everything from their energy use to their hormone levels to the reproductive system, which is very easy to do in a zoo because it's easy to collect their poop. Anyone who ever studied biology knows the old saying, it's all in a drop, it's all in a plop, because that's what grad students are always looking at. They're looking at urine, they're looking at blood, and they're looking at poop. Well, in the wild, it's very hard to get any of those things from a polar bear. But in captivity, it's there every single day. And so Dr. Aaron Curry is an endocrinologist who literally receives poop samples from every female polar bear in captivity in North America and is able to run hormone assays and determine all kinds of things about their health and their breeding cycle. And those are things that can help inform when U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is putting together a recovery plan for polar bears in the wild. So we do that same sort of thing with rhinos, as I mentioned. We bred rhinos here for years, Sumatran rhinos, and we sent our last 2 to live back in Sumatra. And Dr. Terry Roth and some of her team go every year to Sumatra to work with the folks there on a program where they're trying to use those captive breeding techniques to bolster the population in Indonesia. That is a very much challenging species, even more, believe it or not, than the polar bears, because Sumatran rhinos have been poached out through most of South Asia. But we have not yet given up. We're like, we know how to do this. If there's some left, we're going to try to breed as many as we can.
Wow, that is definitely some behind the scenes knowledge of your work, but also so much information that you've shared can also be found on your website. So I would encourage a lot of our attendees to go to your website, whether you're looking to do a pollinator garden or learn about the zoo's research or how you can support the zoo. We've gotten a lot of questions from people that when they signed up for today, they just wanted to know more because they know that it's a challenging time with COVID, how they can support the zoo, whether that, is buying tickets or donations. How can people support the zoo that are in the surrounding Uptown community?
Well, it has been unbelievably heartening how many folks have joined and rejoined the zoo as members this year. When we were closed for 3 months, people kept buying memberships at the same pace they would typically in the spring. And their message was, we know you're going to open again. We want to support you now so you're thriving and you'll be raring to go. And that's continued all through the summer and fall. And of course, that's the lifeblood of the zoo. Obviously the revenue, but also those saved families that come are the family, the Cincinnati Zoo family. So that's how that works. And if folks want to get involved or support, there are many, many ways you can do it. You can participate in a lot of our programs. We're still having fundraisers, even though they're virtual fundraisers that you can participate in. And we still try to have ways to make it fun. And certainly coming out here, you'll get excited. Our goal at the zoo, sort of our daily goal that we talk about, we have our morning huddles with the staff that works out on the grounds. It is to inspire every visitor with wildlife every day, because everybody knows deep down that endangered species are in trouble. Everybody knows deep down that conservation is important, not just for polar bears, but for people. But we need to make it more of our lives if it's really going to become something that has a real difference. And zoos are a great way to begin that. I often say we're the on-ramp to conservation because everybody that goes to Kroger goes to the zoo. So, you don't have to live in Uptown and be cool and drive a Subaru. You can just be about anybody and still be involved with conservation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're going into Rue Valley. We're getting near the the kangaroos. If you haven't been to Rue Valley, you should come. It's still warm enough. The kangaroos are out and the little penguins are out. In fact, look at these kangaroos right here.
Wow. Gosh, what an immersive experience in Rue Valley where you're able to walk around with them.
Yeah. We have 9 kangaroos, 5 gray kangaroos, and 4 red kangaroos. They're both the big species that get as big as a human. As you can see, they fill the same niche as deer do where we live. In fact, if you know anyone from Australia, they say, are you telling me that Americans will pay money to see a kangaroo? Because there's more kangaroos in Australia than there are people. But they're great animals and they're much faster than deer. When they really get going, they get going.
Gosh. Yes. And aren't they a lot taller than you expect? Well,
they are. These are youngsters. These are all 1-year-old males. But as they get bigger, they'll get as big as a human, sure, over 150 pounds, upwards towards 6 feet tall.
Wow.
So that's fun. The reason we have all males is many species are this way. If you were to have a mixed gender herd, the males would fight. They want to compete for who gets to breed. And if you have just males, they kind of get over it. It's kind of like a fraternity party at Miami University.
Yeah, I can imagine. And aren't you near the penguins as well?
Oh yeah, we're headed down there. We've become a penguin center around here. We have 5 species of penguins at the zoo, 2 new really big outdoor exhibits, which are fun. Now this one is for the smallest penguin in the world. It's called the little blue penguin. They live in Australia and Tasmania and New Zealand. Now it's cool enough out. I don't know where they are. The background, it's breeding season. So if you can see that doorway over here, that goes back into an indoor space with a big pool. And they have nest boxes back there. So they may be in there right now mating. I see someone down here. Yeah, I guess the penguins are hiding from us. But it's a fun exhibit. The water here is a fascinating story. It's heated because it doesn't typically get as cold as here, as it gets colder here than it does in Australia. But look back here and you'll see here a couple that are doing their own nesting. They're back here in that little corner. The water for the penguins and the polar bears and Fiona and everybody is all rainwater that we capture underground. And it's a tremendous savings to the zoo financially, because when we used to use tap water, gosh, we used to go broke. But now our irrigation, our waterfalls, our moats, and our pools for the animals are all rainwater.
Wow. Yeah, you definitely have made some waves with your sustainability efforts.
It is. It's a neat thing. If anybody ever wonders how to do it, hire a civil engineer. You know, people talk about going green. People talk about recycling. You hire an engineer, they don't talk about it, they do it. So we've gone a long way, it's true. And the nice thing is a lot of it is cost savings. The water issue in Cincinnati is a very expensive thing because of the very antiquated sewer system. And as a result, the Metropolitan Sewer District is having to charge a huge amount for sewage. And that's important, but you can go broke if you use as much water as we do. So we're down to less than 1/6 of the tap water that we used to use 15 years ago. And the zoo has many more water elements.
Yes. And like you said, I can only imagine the amount of water you're using for your facilities, for the animals and whatnot. So this has definitely been a great advancement for you all.
It has, and it's a good thing. You know, it's funny when you think of how managed all this is. The little penguins pool is heated this time of year, and in the summer it can be chilled a little bit if it needs to be. Meanwhile, our polar bear pool is chilled to an incredible degree. Even in the middle of a hot August day, it never goes below 65 degrees. Fiona's pool is heated as well, and not as hot as a hot tub, but she can come out in the wintertime as long as it's not below 40. And then our African penguin pool is heated as well. So we try to make sure the animals can be out as much as possible, partly because the public's here to see them, but also the more they're out, the more they can swim, the better it is for them.
Yes. And I wanted to bring it back to a question that we talked a little bit about earlier with the Festival of Lights. But as you know, we have quite a few Uptown businesses, small businesses, organizations, and community leaders on the call today. And they're wondering how they can promote the Festival of Lights, because oftentimes somebody will come up to the Festival of Lights and then they'll head over to Short Vine or Ludlow or Calhoun Street to grab a bite to eat. And so they're really wanting to make sure they can promote the Festival of Lights and bring people through their door as well, safely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as the zoo's grown to be such a draw, I know a lot of that does fold back over into Uptown businesses. Short Vine, as you said, of course, Ludlow, McMillan, Calhoun, those are all good. Being in Uptown is a very good thing when you think about it. The zoo has a lot of partnerships with Cincinnati Children's. We work a lot with them on our access program for families with kids on the spectrum or with developmental disabilities. Tri-Health is a great partner. They stitched me up the time I got clipped by a car on Vine Street in OTR on my bicycle.
Oh gosh.
UC Health is a good partner with the zoo on a variety of things. They sponsor some of our stuff here. And of course, the university is important to the whole region and very important to the zoo. My family has a long history of folks that have gone to UC. My oldest daughter got her PhD in developmental biology there. So Uptown is a good place for people to be. Certainly, it sounds like the smartest people in town live and work in Uptown, so that counts for something.
Right.
In terms of helping the zoo, a lot of it's about telling the story. So if you have a business or know folks that are coming to this part of town or coming to Cincinnati from elsewhere, tell them to come over to the zoo. You wouldn't believe how much feedback we get from, say, the Hampton Inn, right there on the corner of MLK and Short Vine. I think they've been closed some this year, but the past couple of years, because of Fiona, they had record years, and it was clearly because people came from out of town, looked it up, and it was the closest hotel to the zoo. You might have been to the new Graduate Hotel, which is the redo of Kingsgate. That whole thing has a zoo theme to it. So yeah, telling the story, inviting people to come, inviting them to see what we're doing. And if you want to directly contribute, you certainly can. I mentioned our big campaign. You can find out all that on the web. But, the thing is, if we spread the word of what's going on that's good in Cincinnati, what's going on that's good in Uptown, that story leads to more positive support all the way around. Sometimes people in Uptown, I think, a little feel like, oh gosh, we don't get all the good vibe that you get, Fountain Square or downtown Cincinnati Incorporated or OTR, but they don't have all the things we have up here. So I think we've got a lot to brag about in Uptown.
Absolutely. That is true. With the amount of residents that we have, the students, all the people working at these large institutions and visiting our restaurants and businesses, we definitely do have a lot going up here. So what are we looking at now?
Well, I'm showing you this because this is, as we leave the exit of Rue Valley, it looks over what is our maintenance area, but because of all the plantings that our botanical team put in, we put in green roofs above those barns, planted these crazy evergreens. It's one of the prettiest places in this part of town instead of one of the ugliest. You just pick up everywhere.
I don't know if you can hear me, Thane, but you cut out just a little bit. So hopefully we'll get you back here. I know we're wrapping up here shortly. Well, maybe it'll buffer out. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Thane, but thank you so much for getting on the call with us today. We so appreciate your time and your energy for Cincinnati and for Uptown and our region. And can you hear me now? There you are. I was just saying that the technology was buffering a little bit. Can you hear me, Thane? Well, like I said, thank you all for joining our call today.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Exactly. Thank you. Sorry about that. I must have hit a dead zone.
No worries.
Well, I hope it was okay wandering through the zoo like this. At least
yeah, absolutely.
It's different than any other Zoom call you've done for a while.
Yes, no, it was lovely. And we've recorded this, so we're able to put it up on our YouTube channel as well. for others interested in hearing more that are in Uptown. And we so appreciate you jumping on and giving the opportunity for our Uptown businesses and residents just to hear directly from you and how they can support the zoo, and vice versa, how the zoo is such an asset to all of us. So I can't thank you enough for getting on today's call. And I loved seeing the surrounding background and watching you walk around. It definitely made for a fun call. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you out here. We're here every day, so come on over.
Yes. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.